Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I want to talk about some of the strange, disturbing, and unexplained things that are happening in our state and national parks. In this video, I'll be reading true stories and eyewitness accounts, and even one email from a park ranger that makes one wonder, how much do park officials really know, and why aren't they talking about it? You don't want to miss this one. Oh, and grab your compass. We might get off the beaten path a bit. Now let's ride. Number 1. Hey Tattooed. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had a Sioux burial mound about a half-mile from our spot. After fishing for better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a small trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute hike. I put on a clip-on light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail better. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I just assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where I'd seen the fireflies. That was when I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large, white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf, but almost unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because the eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. And this thing just stared us down but never made a sound. My friend yelled at it to try and scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back, exactly mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things, so I yelled at it again, and it responded back at the same volume, same pitch, exactly like my voice. At this point, we realized this wasn't an animal. We both continued on the path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with this creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there, staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods and I could no longer see its eyes. We finally made it back to our vehicles and felt a sense of relief. I asked her, "Did you hear that thing talk back to me?" She said she did, and it sounded like my voice when it responded. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed that I imagined it. We went over what happened, and our stories were exactly the same, except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend, who's native Hmong, went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience for several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described the experience and asked for a cleansing of my own, they said they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months just to feel normal again, but I think about it on a weekly basis. I tried doing further research and contacted the management at the park. They wouldn't take a formal report. The guy did say that, off the record, the park we went to had ancient native remains scattered along that river that were unmarked. He also said there were many more native remains in the park than any of the other parks that they managed, and although people report strange things, they weren't supposed to talk about them. I contacted one of my Native American friends I have out west and was told the entity that we encountered sounded like a skinwalker, but they didn't know what the Sioux would call them. I know skinwalkers are part of the Navajo culture, but from what he told me, it checks the boxes more than any other supernatural being or cryptid. Thanks. Signed, Oscar. Number 2. Hey, Tattooed Biker. I'm a park ranger in Northern California, and I've seen and heard a lot of strange things here. We get all kind of reports and are discouraged from putting them on record. So many stories of black-eyed people wandering around in the woods and calling out in the night, mimicking the sound of running water or a bobcat screaming. One man in particular goes to every news station that he thinks will listen to him and tells the same story. He was out deer hunting, had camped out in a very remote area, and woke up because something was scraping against his tent. He thought it was a raccoon or a fox until the thing pressed its face against the door of his tent, at which point he could very clearly make out a human nose and mouth. He kicked at it, but it leaped back and was gone by the time he opened the flap, gun at his side. He fired 2 warning shots, and when the sound had faded, he heard a snap behind him. A man was standing at the edge of his campsite. This man wasn't wearing any clothing, but he also didn't possess any kind of human flesh. As this hunter described it, the man was made of some kind of amalgamation of raw meat and hair, as if someone had scooped up roadkill and molded it into the vague shape of a human. The face was all lumpy and only had a rough approximation of a human face. It opened its lopsided mouth, and from it came the sound of the gun that the hunter had fired. It did this twice before mimicking the sound of the tent zipper and then fleeing off into the night. There's also an account of a young woman who disappeared in the park. Initially, everyone assumed that she was a runaway. She didn't come from a great home life, so it really wasn't any kind of surprise that she had choose to cut and run, but people started coming forward, saying that they had seen her around the park shortly before she vanished. Some of the park rangers in the area were sent out to make sure that she hadn't hung herself or something on any of the back trails. It took them a while, but they eventually did find her. Well, not all of her. Just half of her tongue and a quarter of her lower jaw. Very clean cuts from what I've heard. They never did find the rest of her. There are also many reports of children going missing and turning up in caves, being wedged in between impossibly tight spaces. So many of them are found on mountain peaks or at the bottoms of sheer gullies, with missing shoes, missing socks, or found with both in perfect condition despite them being miles and miles from where they vanished. A young couple, out for a hike in the rocky areas of my own park, reported to me yesterday that they had seen something strange out on a peak that I'm very familiar with. They were taking turns looking through a pair of binoculars when the man noticed a hiker climbing up a very steep part of the cliff face. He watched him scale the slope, and it didn't occur to him until the incident was over that this person had no climbing gear. When the climber reached the top of the peak, which was about 5 miles away, they turned and faced the young man. He said whoever or whatever this person was looking right at them. The climber waved in an exaggerated manner before snapping in half at the waist, sideways, and then leaping off the peak. The young man didn't see where the climber landed. I sent them on their way with assurances that I'd check it out, but I lied. I won't be turning in a report because there are 10 others just like it. That climber is well known in the area. I don't even question it anymore. Thanks for reading this. Signed, Shane. Number 3. Dear TB, this happened on Monday, October the 18th, 2021 at midday. I'll never forget it. I had taken my 7 and 3-year-old sons to Rock State Park, which is about 1.5 miles up the road from my house. We were in the Hidden Valley area. The park is small with 4 parking spots and a half-mile trail that follows a creek. The trail ends at a fork in the creek with a beachhead about 20 feet long. 6 people would be a crowd. Now, both of my sons are familiar with the park as it's in a rotation of 3 parks that we choose from to go on a little hike about once a week. The trail is moderate with some inclines, natural obstacles, and occasionally narrowing due to a lack of maintenance. My oldest son is comfortable, being about 30 to 50 feet ahead of me while I pace with my youngest. Nothing is out of the ordinary, just a normal hike. My oldest reached the beach about 15 seconds before us. We approach the edge of the creek and my youngest is on my left, starting to mess with the rocks and throwing them in the creek. My oldest boy is 10 to 15 feet to my right, messing around and throwing rocks in the water. I bent down to cuff my pant leg and hear a blood-curdling scream from my oldest. I look at him, and he's screaming, falling backwards, feverishly kicking his legs. I follow his line of sight across the creek, and perched on a large flat rock is an animal that I just couldn't understand. It was no more than about 20 feet away, and its dimensions seemed so large it looked like it could leap the creek in one stride. A barrel chest with clearly defined pectoral muscles, shoulders and biceps, no different than a man, just a lot larger. Bulging eyes and a stubby snout like a hyena. It was crouched down like a sprinter, and not an animal on all fours. Its thighs and hind end were noticeably large. The mass of this animal was completely unnatural. The ears faced forward with hair tufts on the side and tops of the head. The face looked like it was on high alert, similar to when your dog has a quick head movement because you're getting ready to throw a ball. It kept switching between my son, screaming, falling backwards into the trail, and me screaming and grabbing my other boy. As I'm frantically trying to get between it and my oldest son, it looks like it was in the lunging position. That or backing up. My perspective was head on before turning into the trail. I get to him, and we're out of direct sight. I yell at my oldest to run. The weirdest thing would happen. The 7-year-old would start sprinting and crying, and after 30 feet he would turn around almost in a complete daze, not understanding what was happening. Then I would have to yell at him again, and he would cry, run, and stop. This happened 3 more times. I still don't understand how shock or fear could do that. The animal didn't follow us down the trail. The thoughts going through my head I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. It was the only time in my life when I knew that I couldn't protect my children. The buck knife on my hip was no better than a pillow. The moment I told my 7-year-old that he might have to take his little brother's hand and get back to the car as fast as he could. This has left a scar deeper in my mind than this unexplained animal. Even though there was no mistaking what I saw, it doesn't matter. Trying to explain this to anyone is just pointless. I feel like I'm considerably self-aware, and I can't understand why my mind is forcing me to try and debunk what I saw. I was undoubtedly afraid, but my focus was crystal clear. Kids, safe at all costs. I was laser focused on my surroundings and what I was in. I'm 100% sure that none of my emotions distorted my vision or made me misinterpret my surroundings. I know that I saw what I saw, and I feel the need to share my story where I can so that others can keep their kids safe. Thanks for letting me. Signed, Amber. Number 4. Hey TB, I encountered a shadow being from the Judge Branch campsite in the Frozen Head State Park of Tennessee. It was the summer of 2017, and I was camping alone, and in broad daylight. It seemed to just jump right out in front of me as I was shaking out my small tent. It was 6 feet tall and completely black. In fact, it was so black, it was like looking into a hole in reality, rather than just being black in color. It was there for a few seconds, and that was enough time for me to stumble back and reach for my bear spray. It disappeared immediately. Then I was literally so stunned that it took me time to figure out what I'd seen. It seemed to drain me emotionally, intellectually, and even physically. I was rendered stupid for a good hour. I was unable to think clearly or in any way mentally process the black humanoid figure that I'd just seen. I had survived a terrible case of Lyme disease, 20 years prior, somehow I believed that this experience saved me. I had learned to push through exhaustion and confusion back then, so I dimly resolved that I was leaving while I could. It still took me 3 tries to pack my gear. I would force things into my backpack and drop to the ground, drained of life. Again and again I stood up and did the impossible. Finally, with my pack on and the darkness approaching, I literally had to crawl up a slight incline to the trail that would eventually lead back to my car. With the clear sense that I was being followed, I stumbled for almost 2 miles down this trail. Just as I saw the parking lot, 100 yards ahead, something hit my backpack so hard that I nearly fell. I whirled around and there was nothing there. I felt like I was being drained of strength. I'm 6'2" and very fit, but still this was a grim battle for my life in just walking. I could tell that very soon, even walking was going to be impossible. Fear. Whatever these things are, they take your strength and they trigger fear like no bear or wolf encounter ever could. It uses your every human weakness against you. I kept going on with just a desire to survive. Somehow, I knew that if I stopped in the sunset, I'd be dead. It sounds crazy, but I could sense that this thing would get stronger at nightfall. I crossed a short bridge over a stream, and crossing the stream seemed to give me a sense of crossing a border. I felt like it wasn't able to pursue me any further. It was just a feeling. 50 yards later, I was at my car. Again, being beyond exhausted, it took everything that I had to throw my pack into the car and get in. It took 2 minutes to catch my breath and start it. Drained as I was, I managed to get fast food on the way home, as I could barely find the strength to sit up straight in the driver's seat. I couldn't explain it to my wife that evening, so I didn't try until later. I stumbled into the house and dropped down on the couch. I'm only alive because I fought for my life with everything that I had. I've researched this since, and I believe that this was a 411 experience. I fit the profile. Strong, experienced outdoorsman and mentally capable. Such people are found dead in crazy distances from where they were last seen, if they're ever found at all. These people all end up dead either way. I now understand what happened to these people. It's hard to explain how something can drain your life away while being insubstantial or maybe outside our perceived reality, but it can happen. I survived, and I'm not aware of another adult 411 case that did. No one can really believe me, but I know how close I came to being written off as another open and unsolved case. Try it. Reserve the Judge Branch campsite at the Tennessee Frozen Head State Park. Stay the night. By the way, I researched the site online and found that hikers, years before, found the exact same campsite deserted. Expensive equipment was strewn around the site, and there was a trail of camping gear littered down the trail. It looks like I wasn't the first person to have to run from that place. I hope they made it out like I did. Again, I don't know of anyone else surviving a 411, short of 1 or 2 kids that were too young to explain how they covered those crazy distances from where they were lost. I may be the only one who can explain this from an adult's perspective. I have the records to prove that I was there. I even returned a month later with friends. I just had to confront this force that almost destroyed me. It was a day trip and nothing happened. I will say that I found melted candles on a few of the huge granite boulders that are there. It almost seemed to be evidence of Wiccan activity, but that's only a guess. Using candles while camping is both dangerous and inefficient. It did kind of make me wonder, maybe, if someone was trying odd rituals there, knowing that something was out there. I know that it's there, and someday I will return and settle accounts. I don't like to run from a fight, and when I do, I'll write you back. Signed, Brandon. And there it is. All I have for tonight. So what did you think about these reports? Do you think park officials know more than they're letting on? I can't wait to hear your thoughts and theories on these down in the comments below. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.